Welcome home. We are WNST. Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We are AM 1570. Reminder, please set a dial. Yeah, I have a car too. There's 6 little things and there's 6 more. Just make us one of the numbers. I'll even be number 6. I'm number 6 on my own dash. It's fine. You can put classic rock. You can put 98 rock. You can any. Matter of fact, if you're on the AM side, we're on the same side of the dial as WBAL, and they're a big deal. So the Maryland Lottery sends us out to do something that's a big deal as well. It is our 5th year of the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. It's at Fadley's on Friday. I got my Fadley shirt on. Come on down. If you haven't been to the new Fadley's, we will have Raven scratch-offs to give away. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care Power and Luke up, getting him from a training camp down to Camden Yards. The Orioles are home this week. San Francisco Giants in town. Tigers in town. We will be at Fadley's on Friday afternoon. John Sarbane's going to join us, Congressman. We got some other great guests, and the Tigers are in town, and the Orioles are in second place. But I'm not here to talk about baseball right now. It's football season, and the Baltimore Ravens are 0-2. The former Oakland Los Angeles Raiders of Las Vegas came here and hurt everybody's feelings on Sunday. Luke and I are here to continue to discuss that, and I don't know where we left off, but how about a 10-point lead at home, with 12 minutes left to go in the game, and how that gets squandered? Because Harbaugh, and I saw this stat, has 9 double-digit losses in the fourth. It's like some outrageous number. Now, you've been a coach for 2 decades. You blow some games, but the losses they had last year were curiously weird in that way, that they lost games in the last minute of games that they've been winning for 58 minutes. I don't want to say they almost went undefeated last year, but they ran into the Chiefs at the championship game, but they were that good last year. And now they wake up on the bad side of 0-2 with this incredibly difficult first place schedule. We don't know about first place schedules around it because we don't have them that often, but this is where the first place schedule really starts to smack you in the face and say, all right. And by the way, how about the Raiders seeing 2 hardballs to start the season? That was kind of weird. But in our case, at Dallas, where they're reeling, Buffalo, where, that's going to be what it is here on a Sunday night. And then Cincinnati, who looked like they came back to life despite the outcome. Oh, and by the way, the Steelers are 2-0.
Yeah, well, and you just said it. I mean, the Bengals are 0-2, so the AFC North kind of upside down right now. Not that I thought
Mike Tomlin doesn't think that.
Well, compared to expectations, it is, though. So, I mean, you never know. And again, it's week 2. There are plenty of teams that can rebound from an 0-2 start. You're going to hear a lot of statistics about 0-2 teams and what percentage of them had made the playoffs, and it's low because bad teams typically start 0-2 or frequently start 0-2. So we're going to see. I still think this is a good football team. I still think in the big picture, they'll be okay, at least as it pertains to being a playoff team and getting in the tournament. But boy, they've got some issues, and you can't allow yourself to dwell on this. You have to turn the page quickly because of what you just said. I mean, you're going into Arlington to play the Cowboys, who got embarrassed on Sunday. I still think that's a good football team. And by the way, it doesn't get any easier. It was Chris Jones in week 1. It was Max Crosby on Sunday. Micah Parsons now this coming Sunday. And after that, I mean, you'll have Trey Hendrickson looming a couple weeks after that. So, they've got to figure it out. They've got to be able to run the ball more consistently. They certainly have to pass protect. As we said, I'm going to be on high alert. Not that we're allowed to report how the offensive line is lining up during practice, but do we see Ben Cleveland in place of Daniel Faalele? Do we see Rosengarten replace Patrick McCary? I mean, they both had their concerns. They both had their struggles. Do you just go with the young guy and say, hey, we need to start growing, right? I mean, we're spinning our wheels
growing
right
at 1-4 if you start these young guys and they can't handle Henderson 4 weeks from now, and certainly going down to Dallas where they really got their ass kicked, they got their feelings hurt. This week here, 0-3, oh my God. I mean, that's a different level of whatever that 4%, 9% numbers are of single-digit percentages of teams making playoffs and winning Super Bowls. This is the toughest assignment I think they have in the first 5 weeks for me. For me, this is the toughest game.
Well, I think more than anything, it's the mental part of it, right? I mean, okay, I'm not. Ravens shouldn't be afraid of the Cowboys. But at the same time, it's like you are fighting that mental challenge now. I mean, I think from Lamar Jackson on down, just everyone, right? I mean, these guys aren't used to being in this position. Yes, they've blown some games over the last few years in this fashion, but to start 0-2, it is very rare territory. I mean, we've said it. It's only the second time they've started 0-2 in the Harbaugh era. Before 2015, you got to go back all the way back to 2005. I mean, Nestor, that was the Kyle Bowler getting hurt against Indy in the Sunday night opener, and fans cheering, and Anthony Wright coming in the game, and they started that year, and things quickly spiraled, and they were fighting an uphill battle the rest of the way, and they weren't very good over the course of the season. And Ray Lewis gets hurt, and other guys got hurt, and they weren't good enough. 1999 and 2002 were the only other times. So we're not talking about of Ravens history of overcoming 0-2 starts. It's been more so it goes the other way. Now, again, I still expect this team to get up off the mat and brush themselves off. But it starts Sunday, because to your point, you think 0-2 is taxing mentally. You drop to 0-3, then going home knowing you have the Bills on a Sunday night and the Bengals on the road the following week. I mean, again, we spelled it out in a previous segment. It's not this far-fetched proposition that they have to play so horribly to be 1-4, for example, or something like that. I mean, that's
well, the next couple of weeks they could play well and be 1-4. They could lose 2 out of these 3 games and play well in all of them.
Sure. Of course. I mean, not their best football, but wouldn't have to be their worst either, is to your point. I mean, no question about it. So they got to find a way to win a football game. They got to find a way to play a full 60 minutes. Again, that game was, I mentioned, the final 12 minutes were slapped you in the face in terms of how obvious it was in terms of the collapse. But I still go back to the interception midway through the third quarter. Lamar trying to find Bateman there, and the ball goes off his hands, and it's bounces up. Spillane takes the ball away. I mean, before that play happened, I think a lot of people were sensing, okay, this is where the Ravens are really going to seize control. They're up 10. They've got the ball. The Raiders just put together their best drive of the day, and they got nothing out of it. And now the Ravens are going to seize control, and they finally got Derrick Henry going a little bit, and instead they handed the ball back to the Raiders and gave them a short field, and that game was very different from that point. So they've got to find a way to play a full 60 minutes. Again, there's no shame in losing to the Chiefs in week 1, right? I mean, I said it, I wrote it, I believed it at the time wholeheartedly that losing to the Chiefs, as disappointing as it was, as taxing and as exhausting as it might have been mentally after the entire offseason of living with the AFC title game, that was tough, but it didn't change their trajectory. I mean, they lost on the road to the defending Super Bowl champions. There's no shame in that, but there is some shame, absolutely shame, in squandering a 10-point fourth quarter lead against a team that, let's face it, let's call Gardner Minshew what he is. He's a placeholder at quarterback for them right now. I mean, they're not so bad that they're in a full-blown rebuild and horrible to the degree that you might consider the Carolina Panthers right now. But they're certainly not a team that anyone was anticipating being a playoff team or a team of any cachet or any real substance to be a threat in the AFC. And maybe they will turn out to be that. I mean, Antonio Pierce, give him credit. I mean, those guys played hard in the second half, to your point. Their best players played way better than the Ravens' best players in that second half. But it's still a team that you expect to win at home, and you expect to win 10 out of 10 at home when you're up by 10 points in the fourth quarter, the way that they were. So it's extremely frustrating. And I think the post-game locker room, there were guys that, searching for answers. I think they were shell-shocked might be the best way that I would think of it. And I know disgruntled fans will say, well, they did this last year a couple of times. They did it 3 times in 2022. And I'll hear all that, but it is a different team, in the same way that just because they went 13-4 and really 13-3 in games that mattered, that they lost that Pittsburgh game. That was a throwaway game in week 18, but that doesn't mean that they're just going to roll the ball out and be the same thing, because it is a different team. They have experienced attrition coaching wise and with some of their depth pieces, and certainly on the offensive line, as we'll continue to talk about that at length. But you got to make plays, and they just didn't make nearly enough plays in any phase of the game to finish off that football game and as a result, they kept leaving the door cracked for the Raiders, and give them credit. They kicked it down when they needed to in the fourth quarter, and that's why they come away with the win, and the Ravens are licking their wounds at 0-2 right now.
Philosophically, I wrote that they have a $50 million quarterback and a 50-cent offensive line. The backup plan, right? You know, when things go wrong, and they're going wrong right now, injuries haven't even happened yet, right? Like they're not banged up on the offensive line. They're just not good enough. This whole notion that they're going to coach guys up and get them better, I'd like to think that there would be some optimism in that drive where, you know, they would have some decent tape at the end of the third quarter to say, all right, these are some things that have worked, but I don't know what to do when the offensive line is losing every individual battle on plays. And when there's a premier player or series of players, and you mentioned Hendrickson coming down the line, certainly Micah Parsons this week, certainly the game-wrecking ability of Max Crosby, and we talked about Baldinger breaking down, Baldy's breakdowns, and showing all of that. The offensive line without a net, and the look into Costa's face 2 weeks ago when you were in front of him, and he said, we don't really know. That's a hell of an admission to make. And now we do know. We're 2 weeks into this, and we know it's not good enough right now. And the question is, can it get better? I mean, and listen, the loss of Joe Delisandris,
Right.
it just, I, when it's all said and done, the emotions of all of that. I was with a friend who attended his ceremony on Friday after the loss. They
Mm-hmm.
had his memorial the morning after the Thursday night loss against Kansas City, and just how entrenched he was and the emotions of that, and the fact that not only is the offensive line did they get their ass kicked, they're now going to go into a room all week without him again, and they're used to having him there. And I don't know how they're going to scotch tape this together, for lack of a better expression.
Well, and you just said it. And look, no one's saying this to be to be insensitive. I mean, the human element. This is a man who passed away, right? We're not. No one's trying to be insensitive about that, but they're not canceling the season either, right? These guys have a job to do, and they'd be the first to tell you that, right? I mean, Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Linderbaum and Patrick McCarry, they don't want anyone saying, "Well, your offensive line coach passed away." It's part of this, though. I mean, it is. You can't deny that. Part of this plan in terms of this youth movement was attached to the idea that Joe Delisandris, who they held with such high esteem, was going to coach these guys up. Now, that's not to say that George Warhop, who's come in, and by the way, he spoke last Thursday, classy in how he handled himself and how he discussed it, and really struck a good balance between, hey, we've got a job to do, but these guys are, they've been through a lot over the last month. I mean, it was Saturday, Nestor. I even noted that in my 12 thoughts going into this week 2 matchup. Saturday marked the 1 month since the Ravens announced that Joe Delisandris had been hospitalized and they had hired George Warhop. I mean, think about that. That's just when he was hospitalized, not talking about when he passed away a couple weeks after
1
that.
month.
I mean, right. I mean, that's
They
a
had never
lot.
met this guy until a month ago, right?
That's a lot. So that's where I would say grace for all these individuals from a personal standpoint. And look, we should never get personal when we're talking about criticizing football players or coaches or anything like that in terms of what's happening on the field, right? It's business. It's a results driven industry, right? I mean, all of that. We all understand that, even though if we don't always practice it to the degree that we all should as media or fans. So we're acknowledging that, but at the same time, the season goes on, and this is a major question mark. This is a major problem. And to your point, in terms of plan B or pivoting to others, I mean, okay, I've been talking about, plenty of people are talking about Ben Cleveland at right guard. Check. Noted, right? You could elect to just go to Roger Rosengarten, which is the long-term plan. I think the plan sooner than later anyway. If you're saying, okay, well, Patrick McCarry's struggling too, and we think Patrick McCarry's better suited as our sixth man, and chances are someone's going to end up getting banged up anyway. Let's go with Rosengarten. Let's let him get all the starter reps. Let's let him play and get comfortable and start building rhythm next to and cohesiveness with Ben Cleveland at right guard. I'll hear that, but those are still, they've got to go out and do it. They've got to go out and perform. I mean, okay, veteran Josh Jones would be another option at one of these spots. But, short of going out there and making a trade, and what team out there right now in mid-September is willingly, eagerly trading you a starting caliber offensive line? I mean, this is not the season for that. The season for that is in March, when the Ravens traded Morgan Moses to the Jets, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that happens at that point in the season. Now, that's not to say that there won't be an offensive lineman that you might be able to acquire at some point between now and the trade deadline. But again, what are your reasonable expectations for that? I don't think you're acquiring an all-pro, right? I'm not sure you're acquiring a younger version of Kevin Zeitler for that matter. So, I mean, you've got to figure this out internally. I mean, you do. And, I mean, I don't think you're calling up guys from the practice squad. I mean, I hope it doesn't come to that, but you've got to figure this out. And this has to be better. And it has to be a cleaner operation. And for all of the Derrick Henry hype over the course of the offseason, my biggest question was still who's blocking for him. And, that's come to fruition over these first couple weeks. And I think some of it is also scheme fit and kind of marrying what he did best in Tennessee with what the Ravens do, which wasn't necessarily a round peg into a round hole scenario. I mean, he ran, you're seeing the Ravens play a little more under center than they have in recent years, but they're still going to operate out of the shotgun and pistol way more. I mean, that's their offense. That's what Lamar Jackson has done going back to his days at Louisville. So, there was always a little bit of a question with that. I mean, Willie Taggart, their running backs coach, acknowledged that much over the summer, where he said, early on when we started talking about signing Derrick Henry, I did have some questions because of what he did in Tennessee compared to what we do here in Baltimore with our run game and the style that we played. So, and let me be clear, I'm not saying that won't all get worked out, but you've got to start with being able to block up front. You got to move people in the running game, and they're just not doing that nearly consistently enough right now. So I don't know, man. I mean, it's you look at this group. I mean, the Ravens, they consciously decided to do this. I mean, I think Kevin Zeitler would have been very amenable to, some kind of short-term extension. I mean, he ended up signing what with Detroit? Off the top of my head, I think it was a 1-year, $7 million deal. It's not like it was lucrative, right? It's not like they gave him a 5-year deal where you're giving him a bunch of guaranteed money.
Well, they felt like Derrick Henry would be a better investment with that money, not knowing that Henry's only going to touch the ball 12, 14 times a game. Zeitler's going to run block 65 times a game, right? Like literally. And
well, pass block. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, he's going to be in on every play as opposed to being involved in some of the plays. And this was a value. And look, Eric DeCosta is way smarter than me. Just if you can find him, ask him. He's got analytics. He's got studies. He's got this. He's got, he's got wisdom. He's got all of that. They were the ones that decided to do this way. You were always skeptical of the big money running back. And everybody is except for Chad Wiesling, who I had at Cooper's this week, who represents Josh Jacobs and represents running backs in the league. And you have to have that. You have to have a running back that can do the job. But did you need $9 million worth of running back? I argued for it. So I am the guy that's happy Derrick Henry is here. But I thought that they had better plans for their offensive line. I think they thought that too. And the belief they have in Voorhees, the belief they had in Falalele to put him out there. Like, we've always looked at it and said, that looks a little square and round, looks more like a tackle than a guard, doesn't have the feet to be a tackle, getting out into space. How does he have the feet to be a guard? Can't get out of his own way. Yeah, he's big, but is he strong? Like, all of those things. And we're 2 weeks into this, and I don't know how they march him back out there and say, stop Micah Parsons this week and think that it's not going to go any worse.
Yeah. And let me be very clear. I think it's important not to make this, this referendum in totality as far as Derrick Henry versus, and let's be clear. Let's not present this as a false choice either. It wasn't Derrick Henry or Kevin Zeitler. It was Derrick Henry or Kevin Zeitler or any number of other possibilities in terms of your offensive line and ways that you could go about doing that. So, because I've seen some people say, well, what guard were they going to get for the money that they gave Derrick Henry? Well, like there's multiple ways to do this. That reminds me of the people back in the day who tried to defend the Ravens trading Anquan Bolden by saying, well, they wouldn't have gotten this guy and this guy if they, yeah, there's more than one way to build a roster, right? I mean, it's more than two ways to build a roster. So, I rejected it back then, and I rejected the notion that Derrick Henry was their only choice in terms of, whether you're talking about the O-line or Derrick Henry. I mean, there were lots of ways to, and look, this still might get figured out, right? And maybe it's as simple as pivoting to Ben Cleveland, and he'll give them a higher floor, and it'll look better, and the year will go on. And I'm not suggesting that Derrick Henry needs to have the 93 Cowboys blocking for him. I don't think anyone has that kind of an expectation, but it's got to be better than what it is right now. Anyone will tell you when you look at, especially from an analytics standpoint, and Eric DeCosta would attest to this, when you talk about your run blocking compared to your pass blocking, when you talk about success on the ground versus pass protection and sacks and all of that, they will tell you that the offensive line is way more responsible for your success on the ground than the running back. And they will also tell you that, and I'm not saying this to pick on Lamar, I'm just saying in a general sense, they will tell you that sacks and pass protection probably falls a little more on the lap of the quarterback than most people will generally admit. Of course, the offensive line has to pass block. I'm not suggesting they don't, but I'm just saying when you kind of look at those two concepts, run game tends to be much more offensive line dependent than having a quote elite running back. And when you talk about sacks allowed specifically, that tends to be a stat that probably should put a little more culpability on the plate of the quarterback. Now, that doesn't mean when Max Crosby blows by Daniel Faalele or Patrick McCary and sacks Lamar that's on Lamar. I'm not at all suggesting that. Point is, there's more nuance to these discussions, right? And everyone was excited about signing Derrick Henry, and I get that. I never said to you, I hate this or I'm 100% opposed to this. But I was always skeptical through the lens of, okay, you've got Derrick Henry, but you waved goodbye to Kevin Zeitler and Morgan Moses. And, I wasn't as fazed about John Simpson. I said that at the time. I still am not fazed by that. But replacing 3 spots on your starting offensive line, and, oh, yeah, that's not including Ronnie Stanley and acknowledging his injury history over the last 4 years, that's a lot. I mean, that is a lot of change, Nestor. We've talked about, just to make a quick, brief comparison with the Orioles, how much roster churn the Orioles have had, and a lot of it determined by injuries, right? I mean, but look at what their roster is. Look at what their daily starting lineup is right now compared to what it looked like in May. That's a lot of turnover. And when you have to make that many changes, whether it's premeditated or whether it's on the fly, like the Orioles have had to do, or the Ravens have had to do some of these years where they've been ravaged by injuries, chances are it ends up being a diminished form of what you originally had. And that's what the Ravens are dealing with right now with their O-line. So doesn't mean the season's over. Doesn't mean that I don't think that they're going to rebound and be a playoff team and this offensive line can improve, but this floor is too low right now. I mean, it just is. So that's where, again, the short-term suggestion or fix that people are imagining right now, envisioning right now is, Ben Cleveland stepping in for Faalele. At least it's his natural position. At least it's the spot that he also worked at left guard also over the last 3 years, but at least that, he's a guard, whereas Faalele, I mean, he's learning. And, this has been a big experiment. And his pass blocking looked better than people gave him credit for during the preseason, but I'm not seeing it. It doesn't look good enough. And I'm not seeing enough glimpses and flashes to say, okay, that rep wasn't very good, but hey, look at rep 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 here. And look at that. Look how impressive that was. I'm not seeing that upside there. And even again, if there's something you would try to envision with someone like him moving from right tackle inside to guard and send, okay, 6'8" and 380 pounds, you would say on paper, that means, oh, this guy should be able to absolutely maul some people in the run game, run blocking. He's not doing that. I mean, he's not playing like a offensive lineman of that size. So if he's not doing that, and we already have questioned about his footwork and whether his hand placement and all those different things are up to snuff, then what are we doing here? Where's the upside? So, you know, uh, again, the Ravens know better than I do in terms of expertise and coaching acumen and front office acumen. I get all that. At the same time, that doesn't mean that any coaching staff or any front office is going to bat 1,000, right? I mean, we know that. Everyone's human at the end of the day. We all make mistakes. We all make bad assessments from time to time. And again, I look back, and I don't want to make it solely about Faalele, but that's just a lot of change in one off season to try to, especially for a team that was that close to being in the Super Bowl last January, to change it up as much as they have. I think we all expected some hiccups. We all expected inconsistency, but I'm concerned. I really am, because again, it's not just Chris Jones. It's not just Max Crosby. I mean, every team, not every team. Let me be clear about that. But most teams around the league have a pass rusher that is going to draw attention and can potentially disrupt and wreck the game if you're not able to handle them. And they couldn't handle Max Crosby on Sunday. They just couldn't. I mean, certainly could not do it in a one-on-one capacity. And then that's when you get into what concessions are you having to make in order to shore up that pass protection. And then in turn, what does that do in terms of limiting your passing game? Fewer receivers out in a route. Lamar, I mean, how about the Lamar overshot Mark Andrews downfield on a play that I think he had, it looked like a clean pocket. He had time, but Lamar was feeling pressure that wasn't there. And that adds up. The same thing happened to Joe Flacco, going back to the last 4-5 years of him as Ravens quarterback, where if you didn't have an offensive line that you trust, you're feeling the pressure, even if it's not there on a lot of plays. So, they've got to figure this out. There's no doubt about it. But the problem is, again, what team is out there that Eric DeCosta is just going to call up a GM and say, and the GM's going to say, "Oh, sure, Eric, we'll give you our starting guard for, a 6th round pick." I mean, this isn't the season for that. Now, closer to the trade deadline, maybe, and maybe that ends up being the big move that the Ravens make, that they get some other guy that's comparable to a Kevin Zeitler, right? Or some guard that you feel better about compared to the guys you currently have. But you've got to win games in between now and whenever that potentially happens, if it happens. So it's a concern. We've dwelled on the offensive line a lot, and understandably so, based on what we've seen through the first 2 weeks of the season. I don't think there's any question there.
I wonder if they feel the same way, or they're like, they're going to start trying guys out this week if they're on the phones, if they feel like their personnel, they don't have the right guys. Because it did make me a little queasy watching DeCosta speak to all of you 2 weeks ago about it. I didn't like the expression of doubt, right? I mean, and now we've seen the doubt over 2 hours in the body of work. Lamar has also seen it. Derrick Henry's also seen it. Todd Monken has seen it and maybe tried to adjust to it a little bit in the third quarter in using Lamar a little differently. Even just that crazy play at the line of scrimmage where Henry moved, just trying to do things a little bit differently than maybe they thought they were going to do it 2 weeks ago, because it's not working. They're going to have to adjust in game. And I said, at halftime they came out, played okay. I'm like, hey, there's your halftime adjustment, I guess. I mean, if there is such a thing. But you'd like to think that there's some adjustment being done here to their mindset on the offensive line to say, it's getting late early and we're not good enough right now. And this Voorhees follow, this isn't, we can't win like this. And I think they know better for what competition they're going to face. And they probably saw Max Crosby's tape during the week and knew they were going to need some extra help for him. I would think the same thing's true for Parsons and all of these really elite players, where they don't have an answer for that. They didn't have an answer last week either for Chris Jones.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it doesn't get any easier in that regard. And look, I don't have any problem. Like, for example, Henry's touchdown, he takes a direct snap, right? Derrick Henry did that in Tennessee plenty. I'm not opposed to that. I'm not, we talked about Henry moving on the false start on the tush push play that they were getting ready to run which with what I guess Charlie Kohler was taking the snap. I'm not completely opposed to that, but I am concerned when I'm seeing them come out in the first half and they can't run the ball at all. I mean, this is the Ravens. Forget about Derrick Henry for a moment. And part of my argument about spending $9 million on a running back was what they've been able to run the ball with any number of characters in their backfield because of what Lamar Jackson's presence. So when you have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry in the backfield, and you're not able to gain any traction with your run game, that's a problem. That's a pretty sharp indictment of your offensive line when you have those two guys in the backfield, knowing that any defensive lineman, whether you're talking about a defensive tackle or especially edge guys, they're in conflict for that extra split second that they have to say, oh, I got to watch out for read option here. I got to watch out for that. And maybe the answer is the Ravens need to get into more of that and rather than just straight handoffs to Derrick Henry, but I mean, it needs to be better. There's no doubt. There's no excuse. If you're an NFL offensive line, there's no excuse when you have Lamar Jackson, the greatest rushing quarterback in NFL history, and Derrick Henry, who is on his way to the Hall of Fame, even at age 30, he's not in his prime. He's not the guy that's going to rush for 2,000 yards anymore, but I never doubted the fact that he was still a really good running back a year ago. And I still think he is a good running back. But you have those two guys and you can't block for them. That's a you problem. That's not a Lamar problem. That's not a Derrick Henry problem. That's an offensive line and a Todd Monken problem right there. So I don't know what is it as simple as plugging in Ben Cleveland? I don't really think so. But do I think that can help? Do I think that can make things better? Sure. And again, I'm not seeing enough from Faalele individually. And it's not just on him. I want to be clear on that. But when you're looking and trying to identify the weak link or a guy where you might have an alternative, you have a person you can pivot to, that's the one that stands out because, we all thought Ben Cleveland was going to be the starting right guard. Back in April and May and June, that was the assumption. I mean, that's what we thought. So, okay, Faalele got his chance, and the coaching staff can keep talking about the promise you see or how hard he's worked or anything like that, but I'm just not seeing it. I'm just not, and I'm not sure there are many people outside the organization, and I'm not saying the organization's even seeing it internally these first 2 weeks. I'm guessing they aren't, but I'm not seeing enough good signs there. Enough, when you talk about young guys, you always use the term flash, right? You want to see an individual flash. I'm not seeing enough flashes from Daniel Faalele to think that this is going to be tenable, that this is going to be successful. And when you have someone like Ben Cleveland, who I get it, coaching staff clearly doesn't believe in him, right? And that might be any number of reasons from he doesn't practice hard or whatever. I mean, I don't know that for 100% certain, but the last 3 off seasons speak for themselves. They've had an opening at guard each of the last 3 off seasons, and Ben Cleveland was perceived to be the favorite at the start of the offseason each of those years and didn't start there. So I'm not saying that that's completely on the coaching staff and not on Ben Cleveland at all, but when you have someone at a position where it's not working and you've seen someone else do it, albeit in a small sample in 3 starts combined between 22 and 23, I think I need to take a look at that. And if Ben Cleveland goes out there and gets destroyed and it is terrible, sure, you can go back to Faalele, I guess, right? But it's not good enough, and it's concerning. You can't have liabilities at right guard and right tackle, and then your left guard is still learning and still very much a work in progress as well. I mean, most offensive lines around the league, and John Harbaugh made this point a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was a fair point. He kind of acknowledged, look around the league. It is rare that you're going to find any offensive line that doesn't have a weakness. I mean, last year, for all the talk, and he was a nice little story, and he ended up getting a nice contract with the Jets. John Simpson was a below average starter last year. He was not very good. But when you had 4 other guys that were either veteran players or, in the case of Linderbaum, a Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber player next to him, you can live with that. You can't have 3 guys like that on your offensive line and expect success, consistent success, right? So it's not an easy answer because, again, mid-September is not the time where teams are taking your calls left and right, trying to pet off a starting caliber offensive lineman to you that you need. So certainly not at a price that you want to pay to get them, even if that guy exists right now. So, they're really in a tight spot here in terms of kind of needing to go with what they have. To your point, sure. If we a day or two from now we hear and we see on the transaction wire that they've worked out 5 or 6 offensive linemen, that wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. Do I think they're finding an answer in that group of potential players they're working out or street free agents? Probably not. But the fact that we're even having this conversation really speaks to it not being nearly good enough through the first couple of weeks. And, again, you have 3 spots on your O-line that are such question marks, and you're healthy, right? You're not dealing with 2 or 3 guys that are injured, as can happen. This time last year, Linderbaum and Stanley were both out, right? They were both sidelined in week 1 last year, and they missed time early in the season. So they're not even dealing with that, but it's still
imagine that. Imagine if we go to second
team. This is something
here.
They've got to get figured out.
Yeah.
So they've got to figure this out. I don't think this isn't a crisis to the point where I think it means they're going to go 6-11. But
no, it's a crisis because of the next 3 weeks they
right?
play. It's a crisis because of the scheduling.
Sure,
if they had the Browns next week, despite their victory, I would feel like, all right, if their next couple of games were
they have Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith.
Fair enough. Yeah, anybody that has a front 7 matchup issue.
I'm just saying. Yeah.
Luke Jones is here.
Teams in the league where you would say there are only a few teams in the league where you would say their front 7 is such a non-issue where we're not going to be talking about this.
Right.
This is a weekly topic until the Ravens prove otherwise.
Fair enough. Luke Jones is here. He's Baltimore Luke. You can find him out on the interwebs. You can find both of us all week long doing baseball, doing football, examining this Oriole meltdown that's in progress. Luke will be back at the ballpark this week. Luke will be in Owings Mills. They allow him. They do not allow me. So I don't know what we do for afternoon games later in the week, but we'll be talking about that around here. Also, the WNST Tech Service is coming back this week, I promise. It's all brought to you by Cole Roofing and Gordian Energy. We'll be talking about that. And on Friday, we're going to be at Fadley's. I'm wearing my Fadley shirt. We're going to be down at Lexington Market in the afternoon. Come on by. Get a lottery ticket from the Maryland Lottery. I'll have the Ravens scratch-offs as well this weekend. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multicare putting us out on the road. And we are celebrating our 26th anniversary here at WNST by having 26 oysters in 26 days. I'm 10 days into this. Doing pretty well. I haven't really, other than having 2 separate shucked oysters, I've had interesting oysters, fried oysters, poached oysters, grilled oysters, roasted oysters, oyster stew, oyster soup, oyster fritters. I've had it all. I feel like Forrest Gump, but Forrest Nestor, I guess, at this week. Orioles and Ravens. Not as much rock and roll this week. Pearl Jam and Bruce Springsteen at 6. That was all last week. Playoffs begin in 2 weeks. Yankees are next week. Dallas is this week. Got a lot of business to do around here. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore positive.